The space station Nexus 7 hummed with the constant chatter of 1,000 different alien species, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, growls, and musical tones that would drive most humans insane. But Marcus Chen had been living here for 3 years now, ever since the Galactic Council had reluctantly allowed humanity to establish a small diplomatic presence in the Outer Rim territories. Marcus sat alone at a corner table in the station's main cantina, slowly sipping a cup of what passed for coffee in this part of the galaxy. The liquid was bitter and left a metallic aftertaste, but it was the closest thing to home he could find. Around him, the usual crowd of traders, mercenaries, and diplomats conducted their business with the casual indifference of those who had seen too much of the galaxy's darker side. To anyone watching, Marcus appeared to be exactly what the other species expected of humans: small, weak, and utterly unremarkable. At 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing barely 160 pounds, he looked fragile compared to the towering Krillian warriors with their chitinous exoskeletons, or the massive Gorvak traders whose muscles bulged beneath their thick, leathery skin. His brown hair was kept short and neat. His clothes were simple and practical, and his brown eyes held a quiet intelligence that most aliens mistook for timidity. The other species had quickly formed their opinions about humanity after first contact 15 years ago. Humans were weak, they said, soft. Their homeworld was a pleasant garden world with gentle gravity, and they had evolved as prey animals rather than predators. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no impressive physical capabilities. Even their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, barely qualifying them for membership in the Outer Council. Marcus had heard all the jokes and insults over the years. The Krillians called humans pinkskins and laughed about how easily their bones would break. The Gorvaks referred to them as little squeakers because of their high-pitched voices. The ethereal Zephyrians, with their crystalline bodies and telepathic abilities, considered humans to be barely sentient, calling them the confused children in their melodic mental communications. But Marcus endured it all with the same quiet patience he had learned during his years as a military intelligence officer before accepting this diplomatic posting. He smiled politely when they made their jokes, nodded respectfully when they dismissed human capabilities, and continued to do his job of facilitating trade agreements and maintaining peaceful relations between humanity and the dozens of species that made up the Galactic Council. Today was supposed to be like any other day. Marcus had 3 meetings scheduled, one with a Krillian mining consortium about rare earth deposits, another with a Gorvak shipping company about establishing new trade routes, and a third with the Zephyrian Cultural Exchange Program. Routine diplomatic work that required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to find common ground between very different species. The first sign of trouble came when Vextar, a particularly large and aggressive Krillian warrior, approached his table. Vextar stood nearly 8 feet tall, his black exoskeleton gleaming under the cantina's artificial lights. His forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and his compound eyes reflected the light like polished obsidian. Behind him followed 2 other Krillians and a massive Gorvak, whose scarred hide spoke of countless battles. "Well, well," Vextar clicked in his species' harsh language, which the universal translator converted into standard galactic. "If it isn't the little human diplomat, still sitting here pretending to be important?" Marcus looked up from his coffee, his expression calm and neutral. "Good morning, Vextar. I trust your mining operations are proceeding well?" The Krillian's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Always so polite, little pink-skin. Tell me, what do you think gives your pathetic species the right to sit at the same table as real warriors?" Several other conversations in the cantina had stopped, and Marcus could feel dozens of eyes turning toward their table. This was not unusual. The more aggressive species often used public confrontations with humans as a way to establish dominance and gain respect from their peers. Marcus had experienced it many times before, and he knew the best response was to remain calm and avoid escalation. The Galactic Council voted to grant humanity membership, Marcus replied evenly. I'm simply here to represent our interests and work toward mutual benefit for all species involved. Vexitar's smaller arms gestured dismissively, while his primary arms remained crossed over his chest. Mutual benefit? What benefit could we possibly gain from creatures so weak they can barely lift their own body weight? Your species has no strength, no natural weapons, no impressive technology. You're nothing but parasites, feeding off the accomplishments of superior beings. The Gorvak behind him, a scarred brute named Grok, stepped forward with a rumbling growl. I've heard human bones snap like twigs, he said, his voice like grinding stone. Perhaps we should test this theory. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that he had learned to recognize as his body's preparation for combat. His heart rate increased slightly, his muscles tensed almost imperceptibly, and his breathing became more controlled. But outwardly, he remained perfectly calm. I don't think that would serve anyone's interests, he said quietly. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns about human participation in the Council through proper diplomatic channels. Vexitar's compound eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Diplomatic channels? You mean hiding behind bureaucracy because you're too weak to face challenges directly? This is exactly what I mean about your species. No backbone, no courage, no honor. The cantina had grown almost completely silent now, except for the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus could see various species watching the confrontation with interest. Some, like the wolf-like Fenral traders, seemed eager for violence. Others, like the peaceful Aquarian merchants, looked uncomfortable, but made no move to intervene. Marcus slowly set down his coffee cup and looked directly at Vexitar. For just a moment, something flickered behind his brown eyes, something cold and calculating that had nothing to do with weakness or timidity. But it was gone so quickly that none of the aliens noticed. I understand your concerns about human capabilities, Marcus said, his voice still perfectly calm. But I think you might be operating under some misconceptions about my species. Grok laughed, a sound like boulders crushing together. Misconceptions? Human, your entire species is a misconception. You're soft, weak creatures who got lucky enough to stumble into space travel before you killed yourselves. The only reason you're tolerated here is because the Council feels sorry for you. Vexitar nodded agreement, his mandibles clicking. Exactly. And I think it's time someone demonstrated the true hierarchy of power in this galaxy. Show everyone why humans deserve to be servants, not equals. The Krillian warrior began to move forward, his claws extending fully as his companions spread out to block any possible escape routes. The watching crowd murmured with anticipation, some placing bets on how quickly the human would be defeated. Marcus remained seated, his hands folded calmly on the table. He appeared completely relaxed, even as 4 dangerous predators prepared to attack him. To the watching aliens, it looked like he was frozen with fear, unable to even run away properly. Last chance, pink skin, Vexitar hissed. Bow down and admit your species' inferiority, and perhaps I'll make this quick. Marcus took a slow, deep breath and finally stood up from his chair. At his full height, he was still dwarfed by all 4 of his would-be attackers. The watching crowd murmured with disappointment, expecting the human to either flee or submit immediately. But Marcus didn't run, and he didn't bow. Instead, he looked directly at Vexitar and spoke in a voice that was still calm, but now carried an undertone that made several of the more perceptive species in the crowd suddenly pay very close attention. I appreciate your honesty about your feelings toward humanity, Marcus said. But before you proceed with whatever you're planning, I think there's something you should know about human history. Vexitar paused, his compound eyes reflecting confusion. This wasn't the response he had expected from a terrified prey animal. You see, Marcus continued, his voice growing slightly colder, My species has a saying, "Still waters run deep." It means that sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that don't look dangerous at all. The cantina had become so quiet that the hum of the life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. Several species who had been ignoring the confrontation were now watching with sudden, inexplicable interest. "For 15 years," Marcus said, taking a small step away from the table, "humanity has been content to let the galaxy see us as weak. We've smiled politely at your jokes, accepted your insults, and worked within your systems. We've been the perfect example of a peaceful, non-threatening species." Something in his tone was starting to make even Vextar hesitate. The Krillian's claws remained extended, but he had stopped advancing. "But what none of you seem to have asked," Marcus continued, his brown eyes now locked on Vextar's compound ones, "is how a species you consider weak and inferior managed to survive long enough to develop space travel in the first place." The temperature in the cantina seemed to drop several degrees, though the life support systems hadn't changed. Several of the watching aliens found themselves unconsciously stepping back, though they couldn't say exactly why. "After all," Marcus said, his voice now carrying an edge that made Grok's rumbling growl seem like a kitten's purr by comparison, "our homeworld isn't exactly the peaceful garden you imagine it to be." The silence in the cantina stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus stood perfectly still, his unassuming frame seemingly dwarfed by the 4 predators surrounding him. But something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere of the room. The watching aliens could feel it, though most couldn't identify what it was. Vextar's mandibles clicked nervously. "What are you talking about, human? Everyone knows Earth is a peaceful world with low gravity and abundant resources." Marcus smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't the polite, diplomatic expression the aliens had grown accustomed to seeing. This smile was different, colder, sharper. "Peaceful?" Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine amusement. "Is that what your intelligence reports told you? Let me guess. Your scouts observed our cities, our agriculture, our apparent lack of military fortifications, and concluded that we're a species that evolved without significant predation or warfare." Grok shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame suddenly seeming less intimidating. "Your planet has no dangerous predators, no extreme environments. Your people live in comfort and safety." "That," Marcus said quietly, "is because we killed them all." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Several of the watching aliens actually stepped backward, their survival instincts finally beginning to overcome their curiosity. Marcus began to pace slowly, his movements casual, but somehow predatory. "You want to know about Earth's predators? Let me tell you about the creatures that used to share our world. Massive reptiles with jaws that could crush vehicles. Cats the size of shuttlecraft with claws like vibroblades. Bears that stood 12 feet tall and could tear through metal. Venomous serpents whose bite could drop a Gorvac in seconds." He paused, looking directly at each of his would-be attackers in turn. "We didn't evolve alongside these creatures, gentlemen. We drove them to extinction." Vextar's compound eyes dilated with something that might have been the beginning of fear. "That's impossible. Your species lacks natural weapons, protective armor, enhanced strength." "Natural weapons," Marcus interrupted, and this time his smile showed teeth. "You're looking at our natural weapons right now." He tapped his temple with one finger. "This is the most dangerous predator Earth ever produced. We didn't need claws or fangs or armor. We had something better. We could think. We could plan. We could adapt. And most importantly, we could work together." The cantina's atmosphere had become thick with tension. Even the Zephyrians, who normally maintained their aloof superiority through telepathic communication, had gone completely silent. "You see," Marcus continued, beginning to circle around Vextar and his companions with deliberate slowness, While your species were evolving physical advantages, mine was evolving something far more dangerous. We learned to be persistence hunters. We would track our prey for days, weeks if necessary, never stopping, never giving up, until our target collapsed from exhaustion. Grok tried to maintain his aggressive posture, but his eyes were now tracking Marcus's movement with the wariness of prey watching a predator. Persistence hunting requires endurance, not intelligence. Marcus nodded approvingly. Exactly. And do you know what gave us that endurance? What allowed us to outlast creatures bigger, faster, and stronger than ourselves? He stopped directly in front of the massive Gorvak, looking up at the 8-foot-tall alien without a trace of intimidation. We learned to ignore pain. We learned to push past exhaustion. We learned to keep fighting even when our bodies were screaming at us to stop. The human's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow every being in the cantina could hear him perfectly. While your species evolved to rely on strength or speed or natural weapons, mine evolved to simply refuse to die. Vextar's claws had begun to retract involuntarily. You're trying to frighten us with stories. Humans are prey animals. Your fight-or-flight response proves it. Fight or flight. Marcus laughed, and the sound made several aliens actually flinch. You've misunderstood that response entirely. It's not about fear. It's about optimization. When faced with danger, we assess the situation and choose the most effective response. Flight when retreat serves our purposes. Fight when violence is the answer. He looked around the cantina, making eye contact with various species. Do you want to know why humanity really agreed to join the Galactic Council? Why we've spent 15 years being polite and diplomatic and accommodating? The watching crowd was completely silent now, hanging on his every word. Because we've been studying you, Marcus said simply. Learning your weaknesses, understanding your technology, mapping your supply lines and communication networks, 15 years of intelligence gathering, all while you dismissed us as harmless and weak. A collective shiver ran through the assembled aliens as the implications of his words sank in. Marcus turned back to Vextar, and now there was something in his eyes that made the Krillian warrior take an involuntary step backward. You asked what gives humanity the right to sit at the same table as warriors. Let me answer that question. He began counting on his fingers, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting a catalog of facts. We turned our homeworld from a death trap into a garden through 10,000 years of relentless warfare against nature itself. We poisoned the atmosphere, then learned to clean it. We drained the oceans, then learned to refill them. We drove countless species to extinction, then brought them back from genetic scraps. His second finger went up. We fought thousands of wars against ourselves, perfecting the art of violence until we could kill efficiently with everything from sharpened sticks to weapons that could crack continents. We learned to make killing machines out of housewives and children. We learned to turn farmers into soldiers and soldiers into nightmares. A third finger. We mastered space travel not through peaceful exploration, but because we needed new places to fight our wars. We built ships not to explore, but to carry our weapons to new battlefields. We reached for the stars because our own planet wasn't big enough to contain our capacity for destruction. Grok was now visibly sweating, his aggressive posture completely abandoned. The Council's records show no evidence of human military capabilities. Marcus's smile returned, sharp and cold. Of course they don't. Do you really think we'd be foolish enough to show you our true capabilities while we were still gathering intelligence? Every human ship you've seen has been specifically designed to appear primitive and unthreatening. Every technology we've shared has been carefully selected to maintain the illusion of weakness. He took a step closer to Vextar, who was now backing away, despite being nearly twice the human's size. For 15 years, you've seen exactly what we wanted you to see. a species of harmless traders and diplomats, barely worthy of notice. But that was never who we really are. The cantina had become so quiet that the sound of Marcus's breathing seemed amplified. When he spoke again, his voice carried an undertone that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the deepest survival instincts of every species present. We are the species that looked at a world full of predators and said, "No, this belongs to us now." We are the species that turned warfare into an art form and violence into a science. We are the species that could have wiped out every other intelligent race in the galaxy 15 years ago if we had chosen to. Vextar's compound eyes were now wide with something very close to terror. "You're lying. The Council would have detected—" "The Council," Marcus interrupted, "has been seeing exactly what we've allowed them to see. Every diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange has been part of a comprehensive intelligence operation spanning 15 years. We know the location of every major military installation, every supply depot, every communication hub in Council space." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembled aliens. "We know how many ships each species can field, what weapons they carry, and exactly how long it would take to cripple their military capabilities. We've infiltrated your governments, your military hierarchies, and your intelligence services. Some of your most trusted advisors have been reporting to human command for years." The implications were staggering. Every alien in the cantina was now mentally reviewing their own species' interactions with humans, wondering what information might have been compromised, what vulnerabilities might have been exposed. "But," Marcus continued, his voice becoming almost conversational, "we didn't come here to conquer anyone. We came here to find our place in a larger galaxy. We hoped that we could coexist peacefully with other species, share knowledge and resources, and build something better than the endless cycle of violence that defined our early history." He looked around the cantina again, his expression now sad rather than threatening. "We've spent 15 years trying to prove that we could be good neighbors, good trading partners, good allies. We've endured your jokes and insults and dismissals because we believed that eventually mutual respect and understanding would develop naturally." Vexatar's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among Krillians. "Then why are you telling us this now?" Marcus turned back to the alien warrior, and the cold calculation in his eyes made Grok actually whimper. "Because you forced me to choose between maintaining our peaceful facade and defending the honor of my species. And I think it's time you understood exactly who you've been insulting for the past 3 years." The transformation in Marcus was subtle but unmistakable. His posture hadn't changed dramatically, he wasn't shouting or making threatening gestures, but something fundamental had shifted. The mild-mannered diplomat was still there, but now it was merely a mask barely concealing something far more dangerous underneath. "You want to test human weakness?" Marcus asked quietly, rolling up the sleeves of his simple diplomatic attire. "You want to demonstrate the hierarchy of power? Very well. But let me explain the rules first." He flexed his fingers, and several aliens noticed for the first time that his hands bore calluses in very specific patterns that spoke of years spent gripping weapons and tools of violence. In human culture, we have a concept called proportional response. It means matching the level of threat with an appropriate level of force. You've offered violence, so violence is now on the table. But you should understand what you're actually asking for. Vextar tried to regain his composure, clicking his mandibles aggressively. "I'm asking to show this cantina why humans are inferior prey animals who—" The Krillian's words were cut off as Marcus moved. It wasn't particularly fast by human standards, just a simple step forward combined with a straightforward punch to the center of Vextar's exoskeleton. But the results were immediately shocking to every alien present. The punch connected with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting concrete. Vextar, who weighed nearly 400 pounds and stood 8 feet tall, was lifted completely off his feet and sent sprawling backward into one of his companions. The Krillian warrior lay motionless for several seconds, his compound eyes wide with shock and pain. A collective gasp ran through the cantina. Several species that had never seen human combat capabilities were stunned into silence. Even the watching crowd's most aggressive members suddenly found themselves re-evaluating their assumptions. Marcus looked down at his knuckles, which showed only the slightest reddening despite having just punched through what was essentially living armor. "The thing about human bone density," he said conversationally, "is that it evolved to handle impacts that would shatter the skeletons of most species. We developed on a high-gravity world where falling down wrong could kill you." Grok roared and charged forward, his massive fists swinging in powerful arcs that could have pulverized stone. Marcus simply wasn't there when the punches arrived. He flowed around the Gorvak's attacks like water, his movements economical and precise. Every time Grok committed to a strike, Marcus was already moving to exploit the opening it created. The humans' counterattacks were surgical in their precision. A knife-hand strike to Grok's knee that buckled the massive leg. An elbow to the nerve cluster just behind the Gorvak's ear that sent him staggering. A palm strike to the solar plexus that drove the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp. "Human martial arts," Marcus explained as he systematically dismantled his much larger opponent, "evolved from our need to kill things bigger and stronger than ourselves. We learned to target weak points, to use leverage and momentum, to turn an opponent's strength against them." Grok fell to his knees, clutching his throat and gasping for breath. The other two Krillians rushed forward simultaneously, their claws extended and their movements coordinated like pack hunters. Marcus caught the first one's claw thrust and used the alien's own momentum to send him spinning into a nearby table, which collapsed under the impact. The second Krillian managed to score a shallow cut across Marcus's shoulder before finding himself trapped in some kind of joint lock that had him screaming in pain and begging for release. "You see," Marcus said, applying just enough pressure to the joint lock to make his point without causing permanent damage, "humans developed something your species never needed. We learned to fight wounded. Pain, for us, isn't a signal to retreat. It's just information to be processed and ignored if necessary." He released the Krillian, who collapsed holding his arm and looking at Marcus with newfound terror. Blood was seeping through the torn fabric of the human's shirt, but he seemed completely unaffected by the injury. The cantina was in chaos now. Some aliens were backing toward the exits, while others were calling for station security. But most were simply staring at Marcus in stunned disbelief, their understanding of human capabilities completely shattered. Vexatar had managed to struggle back to his feet, though he was moving gingerly, and his exoskeleton showed visible cracks where Marcus had struck him. "This is impossible," he wheezed. "Our intelligence report said humans were weak, that they had no combat capabilities." "Your intelligence reports," Marcus interrupted, wiping a small amount of blood from his shoulder, "were based on observing human civilians, farmers, traders, engineers, scientists. You never bothered to research our military personnel." He gestured to himself with a slight smile. "What you're seeing now is what humans call muscle memory. Combat reflexes trained into us so deeply that they become automatic. I haven't been in actual combat for 5 years, but my body still remembers 15 years of military service." The implications hit the watching aliens like a physical blow. If this was what a retired human soldier could do, what would an active military unit be capable of? 15 years? Grok managed to gasp from where he knelt on the floor. "You were a warrior before becoming a diplomat?" Marcus nodded casually. "Most human diplomats are former military personnel. We've found that people who understand violence are often the best at preventing it. My specific background was special operations, what we call force multiplication." Small units trained to accomplish objectives that would normally require much larger conventional forces. He looked around the cantina, noting the expressions of shock and fear on dozens of alien faces. I was part of a 12-person team that once held a strategic position against 3,000 enemy combatants for 6 days. We didn't win by being stronger or tougher than our enemies. We won by being smarter, more adaptable, and absolutely refusing to quit. Station security finally arrived. A mixed group of Krillian and Gorvak guards who burst through the main entrance expecting to deal with a simple bar fight. Instead, they found 4 of their species' warriors scattered around a human who was calmly straightening his shirt collar. "Ah, security," Marcus said politely, his diplomatic persona reasserting itself as if nothing had happened. "I'm afraid there was a slight misunderstanding. These gentlemen seem to have some misconceptions about human capabilities. So I provided a practical demonstration." The lead security officer, a grizzled Krillian veteran named Kex Mol, looked at the scene with obvious confusion. He knew Vextar and his companions by reputation. They were some of the toughest fighters on the station. Seeing them battered and intimidated by a single human was so far outside his understanding of reality that he struggled to process what had happened. "There will need to be an incident report," Kexmol said uncertainly, his mandibles clicking nervously as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew about humans. "Of course," Marcus agreed readily. "I'll be happy to cooperate fully with the investigation. I acted purely in self-defense when threatened with violence. I'm sure the witness statements will confirm that." He looked around the cantina, where dozens of aliens were still staring at him with expressions ranging from fear to awe to fascination. "Will anyone dispute that account?" The silence was deafening. Not a single alien spoke up to contradict his version of events. Marcus turned back to Vextar, who was leaning against a wall and breathing heavily. The Krillian warrior's earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by wary respect, tinged with genuine fear. "I hope this has been educational," Marcus said quietly. "But I want you to understand something important. What you just experienced was not even close to human combat capabilities at their peak. This was just one person, acting defensively, using only hand-to-hand techniques." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent cantina. "If you want to see what humans are really capable of when we stop holding back, keep pushing. Keep treating us like prey animals. Keep assuming that our preference for peace is the same thing as weakness." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering his final point. "But understand that if you force us to abandon our diplomatic approach, if you make us revert to the predators we once were, the consequences will reshape this entire sector of the galaxy. Because what you've seen today, this is just a glimpse of what sleeping giants are capable of when someone is foolish enough to wake them up." The cantina remained silent for long moments after he finished speaking. Then slowly, conversations began to resume as aliens processed what they had witnessed and what it meant for their understanding of humanity's place in the galactic community. Vextar straightened up painfully and looked directly at Marcus. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of genuine respect that had been completely absent before. "I think I understand now why the Council accepted your species as members." Marcus smiled his old diplomatic smile, but now everyone who saw it would remember what lay beneath that mild exterior. "I hope so, because humanity very much wants to be good neighbors. But we will be respected neighbors as well." The aftermath of the cantina incident rippled through Nexus 7 like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Within hours, every species representative on the station had received detailed reports of what had transpired. By the end of the day, encrypted communications were racing across the galaxy as various governments tried to understand what they had really been dealing with for the past 15 years. Marcus had returned to his modest quarters after completing the incident report with station security. The space was simple and functional, decorated only with a few personal items that spoke of his life before diplomatic service. A commendation from his military unit, a photo of Earth's sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, and a small collection of books that included titles on both ancient warfare and interspecies diplomacy. He was reviewing trade agreements on his personal terminal when the door chimed softly, announcing a visitor. Marcus glanced at the security monitor and was mildly surprised to see Ambassador Thesara, the Zephyrian representative to the Outer Council. The Zephyrians rarely made personal visits, preferring to conduct their business through formal channels and telepathic communication. "Ambassador Thesara," Marcus said as he opened the door, offering the respectful bow that Zephyrian culture preferred. "This is an unexpected honor. Please come in." The Zephyrian diplomat glided into the room with the ethereal grace of her species. Her crystalline body caught the light from Marcus's quarters and refracted it into subtle rainbow patterns on the walls. When she spoke, it was through the harmonic resonance that served as her species' verbal language, translated into standard galactic by her personal device. "Ambassador Chen," she said, her melodic voice carrying undertones of curiosity and something that might have been concern. "I hope you will forgive the intrusion, but I felt it necessary to speak with you privately about today's events." Marcus gestured to a chair that had been specially designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. "Of course. I'm always available to discuss matters of mutual interest with my fellow diplomats." Thesara settled into the chair with fluid grace, her crystalline features reflecting the soft lighting of the quarters. "What happened in the cantina has created considerable discussion among the various species representatives. Many are reassessing their understanding of human capabilities." "I can imagine," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from her. "I regret that the situation escalated to physical confrontation, but I felt it was important to correct some fundamental misconceptions." The Zephyrian's harmonics shifted slightly, indicating deep thought. "Indeed. But I find myself wondering if perhaps the misconceptions were not entirely accidental." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm not sure I follow your meaning, Ambassador." "My species has certain advantages when it comes to reading the emotional and mental states of others," Thesara explained. "We cannot access specific thoughts without permission, but we can sense broad patterns, general intentions, underlying motivations." She leaned forward slightly, her crystalline eyes seeming to peer directly into Marcus's soul. "What I sensed from you today, both during and after the confrontation, suggests that your actions were not spontaneous responses to provocation. They were calculated demonstrations, carefully planned and precisely executed." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. Finally, he smiled with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "The Zephyrian reputation for insight is well-deserved, I see." "So I am correct? This was orchestrated?" "Not orchestrated," Marcus clarified. "Anticipated. Humans have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We hoped that we could establish ourselves as valued members of the galactic community through purely peaceful means. But we prepared for the possibility that some species would interpret our restraint as weakness and attempt to exploit it." Thesara's harmonics shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated surprise, mixed with admiration. "You have been waiting for someone to force a confrontation?" "Not waiting for it, but ready for it," Marcus corrected. "Vextar and his companions have been escalating their provocations for months. Our psychological profiles suggested that they would eventually push beyond verbal insults to physical threats. When that happened, we needed to be prepared to respond in a way that would recalibrate galactic perceptions of humanity without appearing overtly aggressive." The Zephyrian diplomat was silent for several minutes, processing the implications of what Marcus had revealed. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been awe. You allowed yourselves to be underestimated deliberately. For 15 years, your entire species has maintained a facade of weakness and vulnerability while gathering intelligence and preparing for the moment when that facade would need to be abandoned. Marcus nodded slowly. The greatest victory is won without fighting, as one of our ancient philosophers once said. But sometimes a small fight is necessary to prevent a larger one. And now? What happens now that your true capabilities have been demonstrated? Marcus stood and walked to the small viewport that looked out onto the stars beyond the station. The galaxy spread out before them, countless worlds and civilizations connected by trade routes and communication networks that humanity now understood better than most species realized. Now we see how the galactic community responds to the knowledge that humans are not the harmless prey animals they believed us to be, he said quietly. Some species will respect us more. Others will fear us. A few might decide that we represent too great a threat to be allowed to continue existing. Thaisara's crystalline form shimmered with what Marcus had learned indicated distress. Surely you don't believe other species would attempt genocide against humanity? Marcus turned back to face her, and she could see the weight of knowledge in his brown eyes. Ambassador, my species has extensive experience with how civilizations react when they discover that their assumptions about power balances were incorrect. Sometimes they adapt and find new equilibriums. Sometimes they decide that the threat must be eliminated before it can grow stronger. And if that happens? If some coalition decides that humanity must be destroyed? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the same cold undertone that had terrified the aliens in the cantina. Then they will discover why we call our homeworld Earth instead of paradise. They will learn why a species that you perceive as weak and peaceful managed to survive 10,000 years of constant warfare against nature, predators, and ourselves. They will understand why we became the dominant species on a world that tried its best to kill us. He turned back to meet Thaisara's crystalline gaze directly. And they will realize that spending 15 years letting us study their weaknesses while they remained ignorant of our strengths was the greatest strategic mistake in galactic history. Thaisara's harmonics had shifted to tones that indicated a mixture of fear and fascination. You speak as if human victory in such a conflict would be certain. Not certain, Marcus corrected, but probable. You see, Ambassador, there's something that most galactic species have forgotten in their millennia of relative peace and prosperity. They've forgotten what it means to fight for survival against opponents who are trying to exterminate you completely. He moved to his desk and activated a holographic display showing various star charts and tactical analyses. Humanity has never forgotten. Every human child learns the history of our species' survival against impossible odds. Every human soldier trains with the understanding that retreat might not be an option. Every human ship is designed with the assumption that it might need to fight alone against superior numbers. The holographic displays showed fleet movements, supply lines, and strategic positions throughout council space. Thaisara realized she was looking at 15 years of intelligence gathering condensed into comprehensive tactical assessments. "This is why you've been gathering intelligence," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for diplomatic purposes, but for military planning." Marcus nodded grimly. "Diplomacy is simply war by other means, as another of our philosophers observed. We prefer peaceful solutions, but we prepare for violent ones. Because the species that fails to prepare for war is often the species that doesn't survive to regret that mistake." He deactivated the holographic displays and turned back to face the Zephyrian diplomat. But I want to emphasize something important, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't want war. We've seen enough violence in our history to understand its true cost. What happened today in the cantina was meant to demonstrate that we're not easy targets, not to threaten anyone. And yet the threat is implied, Thaisara observed. The capability is acknowledged, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. We're simply making it clear that any species considering aggressive action against humanity should factor our actual capabilities into their calculations, not their assumptions about our weaknesses. Thaisara stood gracefully, her crystalline form catching the light as she prepared to leave. I will convey your message to the Zephyrian Council, Ambassador Chen. I suspect they will find this conversation most illuminating. I hope they will also find it reassuring, Marcus replied. Humanity values our relationship with the Zephyrians. Your species has never treated us with contempt or cruelty. That kind of respect tends to be reciprocated. After the Zephyrian diplomat left, Marcus returned to his work reviewing trade agreements. But his personal communicator was already receiving messages from Earth, confirming that the events on Nexus 7 were being monitored at the highest levels of human government. The message from Admiral Sarah Chen, his sister and current head of Human Fleet Command, was brief but telling. Well done, little brother. The masquerade is officially over. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Marcus smiled as he read the message, then deleted it and returned to his trade agreements. Tomorrow, the galaxy would begin to understand what humanity really was. Tonight, he still had diplomatic work to do. Outside his viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that the balance of power in this corner of the galaxy had just shifted permanently. The humans were no longer content to be seen as harmless prey animals. The Reaper had finally revealed itself, and the galaxy would never be the same. In cantinas and meeting halls across dozens of worlds, conversations were taking place in hushed tones as species representatives reported back to their governments. The humans, it seemed, were not what anyone had believed them to be. And in the depths of space, human ships that had been dismissed as primitive trading vessels began to shed their disguises and reveal the weapons that had been hidden beneath their hulls for 15 years. The age of human diplomacy was ending. The age of human respect had begun.